Hello, I'm Lucinda Jolly, a South African arts writer and educator, and this podcast is an invitation to look at the exhibition Our Ocean is Sacred, You Can't Mine Heaven. It's suitable for art enthusiasts, art educators, and students. The information in this podcast is adapted from my work first published in the Daily Maverick Life section. Our Ocean is Sacred, You Can't Mine Heaven is a public storytelling and radical and archive on intangible ocean heritage. It was a multi-genre exhibition to raise consciousness and celebrate the sacredness of the ocean, and it was on at the Zero Gallery, which is on the corner of Church and Berg Street, and it was made possible by support from ITES, the One Ocean Hubs Deep Fund, and the National Arts Festival. It ended on the 20th of November 2022, but it has huge ripple effects. It was co-curated by researcher, educational sociologist and artist Dr. Dylan McGarry, ethnomusicologist Dr. Budina Munkonri from the International Library of African Music, artists such as Michaela Hauser from the Keiskamma Art Project, and Luke Kaplan from the Coastal Justice Network. So there's a quote from a famous philosopher, African philosopher, psychologist, Bayo Ako Molafe, who says the following: "In these times of weaponized fundamentalism, depleted philanthropic coffers, tired policymakers, and exhausted policies, waning trust in establishment politics, colonial knowledge, and painful interpellations, touchy skins, and prickly attitudes, it's probably wise to retreat, to seek sanctuary, to heed the call of the edges in the middle." Now, just to take a little bit from that, when I'm recording this, it's the end of a year, a very hard year, 2022. And the idea of taking retreat, of taking sanctuary, is very important and very useful when one has a touchy skin and a prickly attitude. And this is very pertinent to this exhibition. The idea of sanctuary, the idea of retreating, the idea of soothing touchy skins and prickly attitudes in a time when the world is really difficult to navigate. The bloom and thrust of the vibrant and sexily suggestive artwork titled The Crochet Coral Reef, with its bobbing penile and frill-lipped labial constructions, was 12 years in the making. And it showcased in the exhibition Our Ocean is Sacred, You Can't Mine Heaven. And it was a wonder to behold. It lit up Zero Gallery, this crocheted frenzy of lip and tip. It's as tall as a wall and wider than a corner. The Crochet Coral Reef has what James Joyce called aesthetic arrest, or in layman's terms, the wow factor. It was a magnet to curious gazers from passerbyers, from children, lawyers, car guards, homeless people, priests, pickpocket, informal traders. It stopped them mid-sentence. It was like a siren luring a lonely, horny sailor with their song. And it incited the lust of many who longed for a pattern of these undulating marine creatures so that they could too crochet one of their own. Bear in mind that many people in our country have never seen and never will see the beauty of an underwater coral world. But this is the only one artwork on this exhibition of many artworks. So in many traditional myths, the world was woven into being. The Hopi spider woman sang the world into existence. The thread of life was spun on the spinning tool of the ancient Greek Moirai or the three fates, who controlled the destiny, as did the Norse fates. The ancient Egyptian word for being and weaving share the same root. And on our own continent, there's Anansi, the storytelling trickster spider god from the West African mythology, who's also regarded as a resistance figure and the precursor of Spider-Man. We've been stitching since Paleolithic times, when we roamed the earth as hunter-gatherers, in a time when we lived a part of the natural world, not a part. Before we took the fateful fork in the road and settled, when our mindset underwent a tectonic shift, and we began to act as separate to and in charge of the natural world with dire outcome. Domination, ownership of nature, livestock, women and children and other people. A bitter harvest which we are constantly reaping. This was an intense, dense, multifaceted, integrated affair, conceived fittingly in waves. After all, it's about the ocean and the sacredness of the ocean. Or, as lead curator Dr. Dylan McGarry said, it's an exhibition of many parts. And one will find itself perfectly placed in our current climate of brutal seismic surveys off the Eastern Cape's wild coast by Shell, and the pushback by communities who recognize not only the irreparable harm to the environment and livelihoods, but also to the cultural and spiritual practices of communities. And any economic expansion needs to honor the experience and knowledge of customary right holders. This approach to the ocean as a commodity has its roots in the colonial concept of terra nullius, or nobody's land in Latin, or wilderness, where land deemed unoccupied, and unoccupied in terms of colonials rather than First Nations, or not recognized as belonging to a sovereign state, was regarded as up for grabs. So that the ocean, like outer space, is seen as the next frontier, and in many ways, it's become the next frontier in colonial practice and materialism. This exhibition spoke, in particular, to the spiritual practices of people. In his interpretation, the ocean is not just a place of recreation and resource, but a place of the divine and the sacred. And in keeping with honoring the sacred, each work in the exhibition expresses narratives about the sacred relationships with the sea. In the first wave, because the exhibition actually manifests as waves, so every now and then there was a new exhibition or a new piece added. So the first included the coral reef, and this is the one I'm going to be talking about, from the Woodstock Art Project, which was begun by Mariah van Gas and Leonie Hofmeyer and inspired by the Wertheim sisters. The tapestry, Our Sacred Ocean, is a massive, dream structure typed, which references the map tables used to carve up Africa during the Berlin Conference in the 19th century, and this was made by the Keiskamma Art Project. Then you had M Theatre's The Blue Blanket, a short movie which explores the impact of oil and gas exploration on our oceans and references the spiritual. Then you had Songs of the Ocean, which is a 2-audio project, song scopes and stories, and it focused on the role of the ocean and what it plays in the isiXhosa music and storytelling. You also had Cleo Drumer's Life Jackets, Intangible Heritage, and these were fashioned from fabrics from his family's past. These are actually flotation devices that bring to the surface haunted histories of oceans and slavery. Then you had Intangible Heritage, a photographic exhibition of images that encompass heritage and spiritual practices associated with the ocean and curated by Luke Kaplan. Purification was an installation using antique chemistry beakers and seawater used in a ritual, in the isiXhosa ritual by Dylan McGarry. And there was also a theatre project by Empa Theatre titled Lalela and Uluanda, and Anya Martin's Hydro Rug, which featured a collaboration of stitching of brown and black histories into a rug. So it was an exhibition that was really, really full of things, but all connected thematically to our ocean as a sacred body of water. Anya Martin will also, or has been doing, a rewalking of the coastlines at full and new moon, during which time she gathers debris to rework into collaborative artworks. And her artwork echoes what author Ursula Le Guin, her book, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. And in this, there's the theory that even before the masculine spheres appear in our evolution, there was the feminine carrier bag, which some consider our ancestors' greatest invention. And so Anya Martin's rewalk is like an anti-hero's journey rather than the hero's journey, which is not so much about getting from A to B, but rather the journey itself. Le Guin's carrier bag theory suggests that all heroes were at one point contained in carrier bags, whether in their mother's womb or in a bag made out of skin. In other words, they were carried by the feminine. And it's this vulnerability, this defensiveness, this dependence on women, which the curator McGarry points out is always the part left out of the hero's journey, and one which Martin's Rewalk looks at readdressing. Our Ocean is Sacred, You Can't Mind Heaven has its roots in an outreach to organizations by One Ocean Hub in an attempt to better understand our intangible heritage and the sea, and how we humans can make better decisions around it. And the overall ethos of the exhibition was a far cry from the traditional fist-pumping activism of the past. Instead, it's much gentler. It's got a much more post-activist approach of the Nigerian philosopher, writer, activist, and professor of psychology, Dr. Bayo Akamalov, whose quote I started this with. From the exhibition's earliest curation stages, Akamalov's post-activism approach of creating sanctuary informed the discussions. Lead curator McGarry explains how the exhibition follows the philosopher's thinking of how, in the height of urgency and difficulty, we actually need to slow down and create spaces of refuge. Or what the multi-species ecofeminist theorist and professor emeritus at the History of Consciousness and Feminist Studies departments at the University of California, Donna Haraway, refers to staying with the trouble. So being with it, not trying to escape, not trying to fix, but just staying present. McGarry goes on to explain that according to Akamalof's spaces of refuge or sanctuary, these refer to spaces that sit between patriarchy and capitalism. A space that encourages people to come together carefully and gently with each other and actually just sit with the problem. It's a wonderfully counterintuitive approach, the antithesis of the masculine and a real celebration of the feminine as inclusive and collaborative. McGarry explains that Our Ocean is Sacred, You Can't Mind Heaven is structured in three parts, or was structured in three parts. One part is a public storytelling project, one part an archive of new customary rights, evidence, and one part creation of space for various contributors to spend time with no other agenda than to build relationships and shift the narrative in all its nuances, the conflictual, messy, emotional, spiritual, or esoteric. So while there's no doubt of the beauty of some of these exhibits, McGarry has what he calls a critical relationship with beauty, aesthetics, and art, believing that artwork should be instruments for consciousness. For McGarry, the artist's job is to wake up and in turn wake others up too. The goal for the space, which operated on over 5 months, was to be multi-denominational, multi-spiritual worldview space for people to come together and to share how the ocean is sacred to them in an embodied way. So not in your head, but through the whole being. The exhibition space expresses a wish and a hope to create a sanctuary in which you can move between doorways of knowledge systems, all of which are speaking to the ocean and are sacred for many reasons. For as McGarry points out, what is sacred to traditional Xhosa healer is very different to an African Zionist, a small-scale fisher, or artists like Ayanda Martin. Hence the title, Our Ocean is Sacred, You Can't Mind Heaven, which is actually one of the slogans that was on the placards that protested against the seismic destruction of Shell.